Good evening. Welcome to the regular monthly meeting of the City of Saginaw Board of Appeals on Zoning. It's the function of the board to provide zoning flexibility involving either an interpretation of a zoning code or a zoning district boundary or a variance, which is what we're involved with in the one case we have before us today. I think most, if not all of you, were here last month and know that the matter was adjourned over to tonight's meeting after considerable remarks by the public, and some of whom requested more time to talk about this and think about it, and at the same time the board agreed to adjourn it and defer further proceedings and a decision until tonight. I guess I would call on the people from St. Mary's if they wish to say anything further tonight as the moving party.
Maybe a quick refresher. My name is Charlie Thompson, 800 South Washington. Again, the purpose of this was to change the variance from the current allotment of 3 non-related individuals into the facility to 5. St. Mary's intention is at that point to work along with CMU to house medical students during their classes with the med school program that's coming to town. Those would be females, all the same tenure with school, the 3rd, 4th year, and we would have an oversight committee with the hospital and CMU that would keep track of this program. Any questions for me further than that?
This, we learned last month that there's a donation pending from Mr. Garber of the property.
That's correct. Mr. Garber's graciously offered this house to us to use for this
All right.
program.
My question is, what if you don't get the variance? Do you still get the donation?
Then our plan was to continue on with 3.
With what?
3 unrelated individuals in the house.
So that you would you'd make use of the property?
We would make use of
even
it.
without the variance?
Correct, sir. We would want to make use of it as to the best of our means.
All right.
It's a large facility, so we wanted to up it to 5 from 3.
All right. I don't have any other questions.
Thank you.
Any? Hmm?
Excuse me. Judge,
Oh, I'm sorry.
are you gonna call him?
We need a roll call.
Thank you. Let's start
Got ahead of
with
myself.
Ernie Armott,
Present.
Bruce Gale,
Present.
Edna Webb,
President.
George Bush,
Here.
Jack Nash,
Present.
Charles Sproul.
Present.
Here.
Thank you.
Here. All right. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the board at this time? All right. Mr. Stempo?
Good evening. My name is John Stemple. I'm the Chief Inspector for the city. There were some questions, I think, that were raised at the last meeting related to
Right.
special use permit was one of the questions. In the R1 zoning district, the only way a special use permit may be utilized is if the zoning ordinance specifically authorizes the planning commission to issue that special use permit. In the R1, there are only 6 uses that the planning commission can issue a special use permit for, which would not be this proposal. And I can read them to you if you'd like, but they're basically municipal buildings, detached dwellings, schools, parks, playfields, golf courses, home occupations, a number of things that they could do that for, but not this use that we're here for tonight. So that option is not one that can be considered. I did provide a memo to the board that was placed on the table. We did have several meetings with the neighborhood group, both at their regular meeting, which was on December 9th. We met for probably 2 hours with a good number of people. There were probably 20, 25 people there. And tried to answer all of their questions. At the end of the meeting, the neighborhood group agreed to appoint a smaller group of people to sit down with City Hall staff to come up with some conditions that they would feel comfortable with if the board should choose to consider them in approving the variance. That included that the variance be tied to the ownership of St. Mary's Hospital. Should they sell the property to someone else, the variance would be null and void. That the approval is for the housing of university or college students who are only receiving instruction at St. Mary's or Covenant. In the medical field, this doesn't mean that anyone could buy the house, and just because they have students that are living there, they have to be specifically medical students attending training at the 2 hospitals in the city. And that any deviations from the use as proposed would have to be specifically approved by the zoning board. After we met on that day, it's at least my feeling, and I've talked to some of you since, even as late as today, that they would be comfortable with the approval of the proposal by St. Mary's Hospital. One issue that I did talk with one of the residents today was related to the historic preservation of the architecture of the building, and they wondered why there wasn't a condition dealing with that. The building and the architecture is already protected under the ordinance because it is in a local historic district. So even though it doesn't say anything in this, they're still tied to those historic district regulations that would require approval of the Historic District Commission before any of that was undertaken on the exterior of the building. That's all I had for tonight, unless there are any questions. I'd be happy to answer them.
I think that the complexity of this is that you might get a medical student that's going to work in Bay City at the hospital up there from whatever university they come from, and they shouldn't be limited just to St. Mary's or Covenant. I think it's broad spectrum. We're looking at a region and the medical availability of medical students in medical schools within the region. So my concern is that why limit it to St. Mary's or Covenant when somebody can see down the line 10 or 15 years and broaden it? You know, if that happens, will they have to come back and ask for a special variance for the 1 or 2 that are working up in Bay City? Or, you know, it's kind of ridiculous.
Any changes, depending on what's approved or not approved by the board, would have to be reconsidered at that time.
That's item 3, correct? Any
Yep.
deviation?
Any deviation,
Right,
correct.
yeah.
Yep.
So it could possibly be accomplished, but only through down the road, coming before us
Yeah,
again.
and we did have some of that conversation, because who's to say that, you know, Michigan State University or University of Michigan doesn't become a partner with the hospital down the road. So we didn't specifically put Central Michigan University in the conditions based
Right.
on that. We didn't want to limit it that way.
Sure.
But as far as the students that are residing there, we wanted them to be local students that were attending courses, or I'm not sure what you call it as far as being a medical student, but that they were getting their instruction through St. Mary's or Covenant.
What if there's a condition that St. Mary's ever changes its name or becomes bought out by a larger hospital?
What did I say about that? Dealing specifically with this property, it should not prevent I guess this addresses if they should have a separate corporation that owns the house. It wouldn't prevent them from having some other corporation own the house as long as it was a subsidiary of St. Mary's. I really can't speak to the changing of ownership of the hospital.
We're part of the largest nonprofit in the nation, so I don't think we're going to be bought out by anybody.
Well, you don't know.
It's true. I'd like to get the same area that
I suppose if that was a concern, we could take the word St. Mary's and Covenant out and say owned and or operated by the hospitals located at 700 Cooper and 800 South Washington.
Are the 3 students in there now?
No.
When the time frame you talking about the 5 or 3?
This fall.
Fall.
Summer.
All right,
John?
all set. Any other questions of Mr. Stone? Thank you.
Thank you.
John, I have one question.
Yes, sir.
Doesn't a variance is given to the property, not necessarily the owner of the property? Is that correct?
That's correct. However, the board can attach any conditions that it deems necessary.
They can
They
attach
can.
conditions?
Yes. It's very specific. It says, in fact, it doesn't even give you details of those conditions. It says, any conditions the board deems necessary. So if you thought they should have tulips planted along the sidewalk, you can say plant tulips along the sidewalk. It's any conditions that the board deems necessary.
If granted, what would stop the next door neighbor or the person across the street from saying, I want to have a boarding house.
Want to have what?
I want to have a boarding house. I have students that go to Saginaw Valley.
They'd have to come here though first.
But how could you grant one and one, not the other?
Well, nobody's done it yet.
Yeah.
It is a separate case. Trying to remember the exact words that I used last time. The home that we're talking about is different than many of the homes in the entire city. I thought it was only 4,300 square feet. Mr. Garber said it was 7,000 square feet, which maybe we need to review your tax bill. But
Not his.
anyhow, it is unique to the city. I'm not saying that there aren't other houses that would fit that same characteristic of this house being 7,000 square feet and having, that's where I think you could make the case for the hardship. Looking at a 2,000 square foot house that maybe has 4 bedrooms versus a 7,000 square foot house that has 7 bedrooms, I think it's very different based on the larger picture housing stock in the city. It is unique. There's a number of them that are still in the city. And you could make the case for the Hill House, which is a very large building. You could probably make a similar case.
What is the perceived difficulty? What is the hardship?
I think it's related to the size of the structure and the ability for it to be used as a single-family dwelling as it was designed. I could stand here and argue it both ways.
That's the question.
I'm not gonna, it's unique. It may be difficult, maybe it's not difficult to sell to a single-family homeowner. But I think in this case it is unique, and that is certainly justification for granting the variance should you choose to do so. I think it would be wise to include those words in the in whatever motion that you make so that it can become a part of the order and the reason why you consider that to be a hardship based on the size of the structure and the cost it takes to maintain it, and the probability of finding an owner that can pay the utility bills, maintain it in a historic manner, as opposed to a smaller dwelling.
Any other
I
questions?
can't see a hardship. I really can't see it as a hardship. If we just voted for the 3 in the facility with the possible change next year to 2 more, because it's not open until September, wonder if they have 3 more students, you know, the variables of this are kind of unique in itself, because you have a neighborhood there where people can see profit, housing college students, you know? And, the 5 or 3 that are gonna be in there, they'll be paying a fee, won't they? They'll be paying rent, and, no?
Scholarship for them.
Okay, it's a fellowship, it's a grant to them.
So they'll apply for
I think it's a wonderful idea, don't get me wrong, but I just see the problem of trying to sit this in a neighborhood that's so historic and strong-willed residential property owners, you know. They fought for years for quality of life within the neighborhood, and I can see where it could be a problem if you get a couple of owners who said, well, let's chop our house up and come down here to the zoning board and get an ordinance for the same thing. Because I know there's gonna be more than 5 students, you know, within that program. There has to be, 3 or 5, you know. How many, does anybody know how many are within that program itself?
If I could just clarify the language of the ordinance. When the board is considering a variance, we're going back to the word hardship. But it also says would result in peculiar or exceptional practical difficulties.
What section you looking at?
That's section 153.621.
Right.
But John, you're saying 7,000 square feet of property is a hardship. It's a luxury, you know? Anybody.
Unless you're paying for it.
I'm saying it's not, I'm not classifying necessarily as a hardship. I'm saying that there is a practical difficulty that exists due to the size of the structure and the maintenance that goes along with having an historic building such as this.
Sir, how many bedrooms in this house?
7, I believe.
Why 5 students? Why not 7 students?
The way that it's laid out, there's minimal change. You have closet space and 2 bedrooms, and there's some of
Are these students there for, and I'll use the term, I don't know if it's correct, a semester?
1 year. Yes, 1 year scholarship is for 3rd and 4th year students.
So you have 50 students per class coming in, so this will be continuing on and on. I mean, it'll just keep revolving.
Yes.
But you're saying only 3rd and 4th year. How are they chosen? Where do the other 45 work?
It's a scholarship that they will apply for.
house them all.
It was in Saginaw, they lived in Saginaw.
But it's only for females.
There are only 3 scholarships, in other words.
We'd like to do 5.
Or 5, that's what I meant, right.
Would you rather shoot for 7 and then they'd be covered if we do approve it?
I think with the logistics of parking and everything, I think that 5 is a comfortable number that obviously it's a big house, we can get a lot of people, but 5 seems to be the magic number that we came up with. Absolutely.
And will it always be females? Or maybe in 3 years, the class, you know, now we're gonna move, I mean, you're spelling out females.
Our intent is females.
So that's what would get approved if, so in 3 or 4 years, if you've got a class of 50 and 43 of them happen to be male, sort of limits your scholarship choices. Well, no, and I'm not saying commingle. I'm just saying, could there come a point in time where, okay, now we got 5 females, but in 3 years, we're gonna put 5 males in
I don't think so. It's hard to forecast that, but at this point, it's not our intention.
That's kind of discriminatory.
it. I'm just trying to cover the base for what if.
Any other questions?
I guess I have one more for John. John said there was a large meeting with the neighborhood association.
Yes, sir.
Then, as a result of that, there was like a select few that were elected by the association.
They chose who would attend that meeting.
Represent.
Yes.
Okay. And obviously, they must have had other meetings saying, look, this is what we want.
That's what it seemed to me, yes.
We have a problem with this. On number 2, it says that the food is for the housing of university or college students who are receiving instruction at St. Mary's Hospital or Covenant Medical Center. Only, wait a minute, I don't have my glasses on. Only and is not for the housing of students attending courses elsewhere who are not associated with St. Mary's or Covenant. Huh? Explain that one, because I see a problem with discriminatory as far as housing for females only. I think that's discrimination. It's bias. You know, you have to look at things, what's best for the city. There's a medical corridor and economic growth, really. But you're limiting yourself where you want to house females, and that's not fair to the male at all. You're telling this male, well, you can't get a scholarship for that house because you're not a female. You know, you don't qualify. And you might be more apt to need housing than a female. You understand what I'm saying? So you got a discrimination problem right off the bat. With the jump sheet. If you take the variance as it is, limited to females, it's not gonna fly.
No, it doesn't. It's just by attention right to this, right?
The,
If I may, the variance is, that's being requested is a change in the definition of 3 non-related individuals to 5. It doesn't state females or males,
It's
just individuals.
So it's St. Mary's choice.
That's how we intend to start the program.
All right.
We're going to change down the road.
a couple things, I guess, to answer the question related to it being St. Mary's or Covenant and not students taking classes elsewhere. That is to protect the building from becoming a dormitory, where, say this program doesn't work, they're sitting there with a building, and all of a sudden they decide to rent the 5 rooms to whatever college student. It's not the intent of what we're here to do tonight. As far as the scholarship being discriminatory, speaking from experience, who those scholarships are granted to is up to the grantor. My daughter applied for scholarships for short people. She's about this tall. And, you know, whoever's granting the money can determine who that money goes to. And I'm not an attorney, but if you're giving the money away, you get to decide who it goes to.
Any other questions? Mr. Stemple? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else to speak to this issue?
Hi, I'm Tom Miller. I am Vice President of Saginaw Future, and we are contracted with the City of Saginaw to provide all of the city's community and economic development services. Stemple and I, in fact, today just met with Covenant Hospital to go over their Covenant Master Plan to look at issues related to housing and rental property and blight elimination. First, I want to thank the board for holding this over to this meeting. I think it was, although I would have liked to have seen it approved last time, I think it did give a good amount of time for people to get their input in, and especially to dispel some of the rumors and false information that was floating out there amongst the residents. I did attend the meeting that we had at First Presbyterian Church with the neighborhood group, and I think Stemple was right, there was probably 30 people in the room, and the meeting lasted for about 3 hours. St. Mary's was there, and they did a really good job of explaining their position. I did a little plan for the neighborhood to look at the number of rental properties, the number of commercial properties that are housed within that neighborhood district. And if I recall, I don't have the map with me, but the neighborhood is around 50% rental today. Oh, there you go. So I think there, and this really goes beyond just this neighborhood group. It speaks about the city in general. We are working on the neighborhoods in general. Home ownership is one of the big issues that the city is trying to increase. But for this particular project, I think what's important to note, I think you have to ask yourselves as a board is this a hardship? So that's the first sort of the legal test you have to ask yourself, whether this meets the requirements for the zoning variance. And as Stemple read and the definition states, that any instance that makes this property unique makes it eligible for a zoning variance. I can tell you because I've done the Covenant Master Plan. I helped update the city's St. Mary's Master Plan for their neighborhood. Having a home in the city of Saginaw that's 7,000 square feet or 6,000 square feet or 5,000 square feet that has a $1,000 utility bill, that has 7 bedrooms and the accompanying bathrooms makes the property unique. And while I appreciate a time, maybe in the 1940s, when these homes were occupied by single-family occupants and there was no suburbs and no other options for people to live, we're at a different time in the city's history. There aren't a lot of people in the county in general, or even in this region, that can afford to pay the utility bills and the mortgage payment on a 7,000 square foot home. I mean, there aren't families big enough to occupy, in most cases, 7 family homes. So I think just from on the face of it, according to the law, according to the zoning code, this dwelling does meet the requirements for a zoning variance. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious. I think that this property meets the requirements for a zoning variance in terms of, is there a hardship? And hardship can be defined as anything that is unique to the property. So, I mean, I think that's the first test. If it doesn't meet that test, then you probably shouldn't consider the variance. I'm not an expert, but Stumple and I did go over things to sort of make sure that the thing meets the test to begin with. And I think most people could see that it meets that test. But I think what I would take away from the meeting with the neighborhood group is, so if it meets the test for the zoning variance, and then you have to decide whether it's right for the city. To me, that's a pretty easy question to answer. The St. Mary's and Covenant partnering for the Central Michigan College of Medicine is probably the single biggest investment in the single most promising project in the city of Saginaw since GM built their facilities here in the turn of the 19th century. So whether it's good for the city, I think, is also a pretty easy test. People say, well, geez, what if we had more students moving into these neighborhoods? Well, I think if we had more students moving into some of these neighborhoods in the city, that'd be a fantastic thing. Certainly they have to behave themselves and adhere to the law and the zoning code, but new residents that pay taxes that are adding to the good of the community is what we're all asking for. That's what we're seeking in all of our neighborhoods. So I think it's obvious to me, and in fact, the two fellows from the Historic District Commission, they put it best. We'd love to have them in the St. Mary's Cathedral neighborhood. We wish that Mr. Garber's house was located in the Cathedral District because we would love the vibrancy that students bring to a neighborhood. So I think that meets the test of whether it's good for the city, and then I think the board has to ask itself, is this good for the neighborhood on a smaller scale? What I walked away with from our 3-hour meeting in the basement of First Presbyterian Church was that after all of the sort of misinformation was dispelled and St. Mary's was allowed to discuss their plans for how they were going to cut the grass and have the house cleaned and preserve the historic nature of the home, and how these students are probably at the top X percentile in terms of their capacity to learn. I mean, they're medical students. These are very serious students who are in their 3rd and 4th year, spend a lot of time working and going to school. This isn't going to be some sort of dormitory for freshmen in college. Once all of those things were sort of ironed out, what I came away with was a vast majority of the people in the room were supportive of this project. I believe the petition was signed
prior to
before the
last
meeting.
month.
Yeah. Because St. Mary's made it clear that they would allow the residents to come see the home, tour the home, interact with the students. After the meeting was over, a vast majority of the people in the room were supportive, especially given the fact that they'd have input into the restrictions that you all could add into the zoning variance. So I think, if it meets the test of whether it is proper to grant a zoning variance under the zoning code, which I feel it does, you ask yourself, it's good for the city, which I think it is, in my humble opinion. And if it's good for the city, if it meets the test and the majority of the neighbors are in support of it, I think you should grant the zoning variance, or at least consider it. So, thank you.
I have a question, John. You said 30 people were at the meeting, and there's over 30 signatures on this. Do you have a listing of the people who were in agreement after your meeting? Because this is part of the legal record, court record.
I'm sure the neighborhood group had a sign-in sheet,
Or
but
after the fact.
we were guests at their meeting, so
come to the podium, please?
Nancy has a list.
Could you come to the podium?
December 9th.
She doesn't want to come to the podium.
She's looking for her papers.
Oh, okay. I didn't know what she was doing.
On the special meeting.
That's the wrong meeting. We do have a list.
Could you tell me how many were in agreement after your meeting with the city and the Saginaw Future?
Would you say that, you were there, I would say that
Majority. What's his
what
name?
happened is.
Can you come to the podium,
You have to come to
please?
the podium.
Thank you. State your name.
My name is Cheryl Gregory, and I live at 1021 Court Street. My husband is the president of the Heritage Square Neighborhood Association, so he passed around a sign-in list. And what I would say is, after the representatives from St. Mary's talked about what they were planning to do, by the end of the meeting, I think that I can't say that there was maybe one or two or three, and Nancy, I know you probably were one of the people that had questions about it. I would say that most of the people decided that with some of the stipulations that you have in front of you, that people were comfortable with having this variance.
Having the five?
Having the five, well, that's what the whole variance was, having the five, because without passing the variance, they could still do exactly the same thing with just the three.
Right.
So even if you had the five, that actually gives us the opportunity to provide some stipulations. Without the variance, there are no stipulations at all.
Right.
So in fact, that actually helps us to have the stipulations in place. It makes it a little stronger. And I think, and there are people here in this room who were against it and probably signed the petition. No, did anybody here sign the petition? No. Did you sign it? Yeah, but when the petition was brought around, there was a lot of misinformation about who was going to be there and the kind of students, and people thought that the home would be split into apartments, which it's not. It's going to be, the structure of the home is exactly the way it is. It's not going to be changed. So there was a lot of misinformation, and a lot of those people came to the meeting. And after the meeting, I think there was no even discussion about the fact that we would form a committee that would go to talk to John Stemple and try to put what you have in front of you together. So there was nobody who said, no, we absolutely can't have this. It was just, okay, let's do it, but let's have some stipulations attached to it. And that's kind of how it ended. And the way that the people were decided to be on the committee, just because you asked were they elected, anybody who wanted to, who was in the room, volunteered to be on the committee. And then what happened is, I'm kind of the communicator in the historic district, so I found out when John Stemple was available and when the St. Mary's representatives were available, and I let all the people that volunteered know when they were available and to come to the meeting. And those who were, anybody who wanted to, who was available, came to that meeting. And we tried to get a mix of people who had a lot of hesitation about it. And I can say there's a couple people here, like Cinda and Nancy, who had pretty strong feelings about it. And then we had Mark, who was pretty, we really tried to get people with different points of view to come to the meeting as representatives. So anybody who came to the meeting, anybody who wanted to could be represented. Okay, did that answer your questions? Okay, you're welcome.
The other, I think, real test is, if you remember the last meeting, there were a whole lot more people sitting in this room. And those people aren't here tonight. I think that's related to the fact that the information got out there. We were open to discussions. St. Mary's was at the table. We we sat in a room in City Hall for a little while and came up with some things that sort of worked for everybody. And I think if those feelings of opposition were still there, again, this room would have been full, and we would be hearing those things, so, just my 2 cents.
All right. Anyone else to speak to this time?
I just wanted to say that I was one of the people who was involved with the meeting with John, and I was in California, and we set up calls so I could participate in it, so everything was done to make sure that everybody who wanted to participate could participate. It was not an easy task to get everybody together since I had to get up quite early in California.
Yeah.
And I appreciated his cooperation. I want to say that as well. That was really wonderful of him to do it, and that's how.
You have to state your name and address.
Oh, I am Cinda Shantz, S-C-H-A-N-T-Z, and I live at 802 Adams Street. Well, it's surprising how many people do it scared.
Anyone else? All right.
Gregory Largent, has he changed his opinion?
That's the email? Yeah.
Yes, state your name and address.
My name is Nancy Burdick. I am at 803 Adams. I work quite closely with Mr. Largent. He has not changed his opinion. There are other people in our neighborhood who could claim a hardship. There's one woman who was here before who lost her husband, huge house. She's not sure how she's going to make the payments, but she wants to maintain that single-family dwelling there, so she's trying to find other ways that when she does need to sell the house, she'll be able to do that. I question, too, the reason for the variance. I don't see the hardship there. I'm sure that St. Mary's will start out wonderfully. On the other hand, David Strauss Hopkins had problems with medical students in his apartments. This would be monitored more, I can understand that, but I think it's more complicated than that. So.
Thank you. Anyone else? Motion from the board.
What would the hardship be?
Pardon?
What, the hardships, not monetary? The
Well,
hardships, not physical, disability.
It is a monetary hardship.
It can't be a hardship if it's monetary.
Well, is there a motion? Let's make a motion if there is on the request for the variance.
Request for variance, I motion.
With these exceptions?
Yes, with these exceptions.
And you're referring, when you say these exceptions, you're referring to the inspection division memorandum dated January 5th?
Yes.
129 South Granger.
Yes.
And over apparently Mr. Stemple's signature.
Yes.
Okay. And
Second.
I think we're kind of like missing the point. The point is it a hardship or not? That's the point. Every board meeting I've been to, we've always taken certain factors to determine a hardship. Monetary was never considered a factor in a hardship. Disability, inconvenience to people, site, location being not structured right, where they had to put it in there, those are hardships, but monetary has never been a factor in a hardship. And quote me if I'm wrong, Dr. Nash, I think.
You can't make a hardship out of a monetary situation.
Right.
It's not, can't do hardship with monetary.
well, you mean you can't claim,
Hardship is.
you can't request a variance so you can make more money, basically.
No, you can't for practical difficulties. There's a practical difficulty.
All right. I thought the uniqueness of it was ample for the hardship.
That's not true. The uniqueness of it is because it can't be sold. Nobody's gonna buy that house because it's so big.
Any other discussion on the motion?
No, it's a very good idea. We just gotta figure out how to fit it into the equation.
I think after I read that section of the ordinance where it talks about, it says hardship, but it says hardship or practical difficulties.
Right.
They're two different things. And you're absolutely right. We're not calling this a hardship. We're calling it a practical difficulty based on the fact that the house is 7,000 square feet. It's 7 bedrooms. The typical family is whatever what's the number now, 1.2 kids and 2 adults. The size of the structure makes it a practical difficulty and unique. And I have no issues with any challenges to that, whether it be from the house next door or someone across town. If I didn't feel strongly that this met the requirements of the ordinance, it wouldn't have made it to your table. It's just how we do things in my office. If it doesn't meet the characteristics of what you should be deciding on, it doesn't go any farther, and if they don't like that, then we can go to circuit court. I have no issues with that. It wouldn't have got this far. Thank you.
Any other discussion on the motion? All right. It's been moved and supported, and case number 14-0048, that the request for a variance from the family definition of 3 non-related individuals as stated in section 153021 subsection 1 subsection B, together with the, we'll call them stipulations contained in the communication from the inspections division dated January 5th, be approved. All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, please say no.
No.
All right. Motion's carried, the variance is granted.